That vehicle is in violation of community standards, and I have authorized its removal effective immediately. That was Brenda Hollis, president of the Crestline Pines Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing in my own driveway at 7 in the morning while a flatbed she had hired backed up to the open mouth of my garage. The car she was hauling away was a 1972 Chevelle my late wife had bought with her first paycheck out of nursing school. It was not parked on a street. It was not parked on common ground. It was sitting on a concrete pad inside a building I owned, on a parcel I had held free and clear for 26 years. On a private lane the association had never once paid to maintain. What Brenda did not know that morning, what she had never bothered to check in 9 years of certified letters and clipboard inspections, was that I had spent 31 years moving heavy machinery and impounded vehicles for the county, that my own commercial towing and recovery license was still active and current, and that the lane her hired flatbed had just driven up to reach my garage was mine by a recorded easement signed in 1961. She thought she was hauling off an old man's junk car. She was about to learn what it costs to tow a vehicle off private property you have no claim to, from a man who knew the law of towing better than anyone she would ever meet. So let me ask you something before I tell you the rest. If a woman in pearls and a pink blazer stood in your garage and ordered a stranger to drag away the last thing your wife ever touched, and you absolutely knew, that every piece of paper in the county was on your side, what would you do? Would you shout? Would you call a lawyer and wait 2 years? Or would you go quiet and start writing it all down? My name is Walt Brennan. I am 63 years old. For 31 years, I drove recovery rigs and operated impound yards for the county to the east of here, which means I have hooked, winched, and hauled more vehicles off more property than I could count. And I have read every towing statute in this state more times than I have read anything except my wife's letters. I started young, riding the second seat in my uncle's wrecker before I was old enough to have a license of my own. And by the time I retired, I had run the night yard, trained the new operators, and testified in enough impound disputes to know the difference between a tow that holds up in court and a tow that lands a man in a lawsuit. There is a right way to take a vehicle and a wrong way, and the difference is always paperwork. A hook and a winch are easy. The manifest is the hard part, and the manifest is the part that matters. I learned that lesson 1,000 times, and it is the reason this whole story ended the way it did. My place sits on 4.5 acres at the dead end of a gravel lane called Sutter Road, up against the National Forest boundary, pine on 3 sides, and a creek along the 4th. The creek runs cold all summer off the snowmelt above, and in the evenings you can hear it from the porch under the wind in the trees. There is the house, a low cedar place I have re-roofed twice with my own hands. And behind it, my shop, a steel building 40 feet by 60 with a concrete floor I poured the year we moved in. And beyond that, the pad, where the Chevelle lived, under a soft cotton cover. My wife Carol and I bought it in the spring of 1999, 2 years before the developer carved the flat land below us into the cul-de-sacs and cookie-cutter facades that became Crestline Pines. We stood on the raw dirt that first afternoon with a thermos of coffee and looked up at the tree line, and Carol said this was the place. This was where we would get old. And we did. Or at least I am getting old here. And she got as old as the cancer let her. We were here first. That matters. And it is going to keep mattering all the way to the end of this story. Carol passed 4 years ago. Cancer, the slow kind. The kind that gives you time to say everything and still not enough. She was a nurse for 34 years, labor and delivery mostly. And she had charted so many thousands of patients that record-keeping was not a habit for her. It was a way of seeing the world. She believed a thing written down at the moment it happened was a kind of truth that no amount of arguing could ever bend. Before she went, she made me promise two things. Keep the Chevelle running, because she had courted me in it, she liked to say, more than I had courted her. And she wanted our grandkids to learn to drive in it someday on the gravel where there was nothing to hit. And keep good records, because she had spent her whole career proving that the truth written down at the time always beat the truth remembered later in anger. She held my hand in that hospital bed and made me say it back to her. Both promises out loud, like a vow. I kept both. The car ran, and I wrote everything down. My daughter Megan and her girl, my granddaughter Tess, moved in with me a year after Carol died. Megan had been through a hard divorce 2 valleys over, and the house up here had the room and I had the quiet. And honestly, I think she came as much to keep an eye on me as I came to keep an eye on them. Tess was 14 then, 15 now, a quiet kid who liked engines more than phones and could change her own oil before she could parallel park. She would come out to the shop after school and hand me wrenches and ask me what every tool was for. And she learned the names faster than any apprentice I ever trained at the county. She is the one who started filming later when the trucks came, because she understood before I had to tell her that a camera is just another kind of record, and a record is how this family fights. I want you to remember her, because she is safe at the end of this, every minute of it. And she is the reason I never once lost my temper where it could have cost me. The trouble started small, the way it always does. Crestline Pines built out across the flat below us between 2001 and 2004. The association formed, elected a board, and for years they left us alone, because Sutter Road was ours and our acreage was never platted into their subdivision. Then Brenda Hollis won the presidency, and Brenda had ideas. Her husband, Doug Hollis, ran a development outfit called Hollis Land Partners, and Doug had been quietly buying up the last raw parcels along the forest boundary for a gated luxury phase he wanted to call The Summit. The only flat, gradable approach to that whole upper bench of land ran straight across my lane. Sutter Road was the key to Doug's project. And Brenda, as president, decided the cleanest way to get that key was to redefine the boundaries of the association until my 4.5 acres fell inside them. The first letter came on a Tuesday in March, 3 years ago. It informed me that Crestline Pines had updated its governing documents, and that my property was now considered, and I am quoting the letter, functionally part of the association's jurisdiction. It cited a covenant I had never signed, attached to a plat my land was never on. It demanded I bring my fencing, my outbuildings, and my vehicles into compliance with community aesthetic standards within 30 days. I read it twice at the kitchen table. Then I did what Carol taught me. I dated it, I made 2 copies, and I started a folder. On the tab I wrote one word, Crestline. I drove down to the association office that same week and tried the polite route first, because I always try the polite route first. Brenda met me at the front counter in a pink blazer and pearls, sunglasses pushed up on her head though we were indoors, and a clipboard held against her chest like a shield. I told her calmly that my parcel had never been part of her subdivision, that I had the original deed and the recorded easement to prove it, and that I would be happy to sit down with her and a surveyor any afternoon she liked. She smiled the way you smile at a child who does not understand the rules. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "the board has determined that your property is functionally part of our jurisdiction, and that determination is final. Bring your documents to the appeals process, like everyone else." Then she turned to the woman beside her and said, loud enough for me to hear, that some people simply refuse to be neighbors. I went home. I wrote down the date, the time, every word she said, and I filed it. That was incident 1. The fine started in April. The first one came in a stiff, certified envelope I had to sign for at the gate. And the mail carrier, a man I had known for years, gave me a look like he was sorry to be the one handing it over. $150 for an unapproved fence. 2 weeks later, $200 for a metal outbuilding visible from the road, which was my shop, which had stood there since 2000 and which no one had complained about for 20 years. Then $300 for, and again I am quoting, an inoperable collector vehicle stored in view of the community, which was the Chevelle, which was neither inoperable nor in view of anything but my own pines, because you cannot see my garage from the subdivision road without a drone and a trespass. Every notice came certified. Every notice I signed for, photographed front and back, dated in the corner with a pen, and filed in order. I never paid one of them, because you cannot owe a fine to an association you do not belong to. But I never threw one away either. Because a fine you can prove was issued without authority is not a debt. It is evidence. Megan found me one night at the kitchen table with the notices spread out in rows and a magnifying glass over the recorder's stamp on one of them. And she asked me why I did not just call a lawyer and make it stop. I told her a lawyer 2 years too early is money spent on noise, and that what I was building was the thing that would make a lawyer's job take 1 afternoon instead of 2 years. She did not understand it then. She would. By the end of that first summer, the folder had gotten thick enough that I moved it into a proper 3-ring binder with tabbed dividers, the kind I used to keep impound files in. And Tess drew a little Chevy on the spine with a silver paint marker, because she said the plain folder looked sad sitting there. That binder is going to matter more than anything else I own. Now here's the thing about a calm man that people like Brenda never understand. They read calm as weak. They poke and they find and they send their letters, and when you do not scream back, they decide you are a pushover, and they lean in harder. Brenda leaned in harder. That fall, a man showed up at my gate in a polo shirt with a laminated badge clipped to his pocket, carrying a clipboard, and announced he was there to perform a compliance inspection of my structures. He was maybe 40. Soft hands. The kind of man who had never run a winch line in the rain in his life. And he said it with the flat confidence of someone who had never once been told no. I asked to see his credentials. The badge said Crestline Pines Code Enforcement, which is not a thing, because an HOA cannot create a code enforcement office. That authority belongs to the county, and the county alone. And I knew that for a fact, because I had worked alongside the real ones for 3 decades. I told him, level and quiet, that he was standing on private property and asked him to leave. He told me the association had every right of access. I told him to put that in writing and mail it certified like everything else, and to get off my gravel. He took photographs of my shop and my gate over the fence as he backed down the lane, walking backwards so he could keep the camera up. I stood at the gate and photographed him photographing me. Dated it. Filed it. Incident 9 by then. The following spring it got worse, because Doug's project got a financing deadline. I know that now. I did not know it then. All I knew then was that the harassment changed shape. It stopped being about my fence and started being about my access. One morning, I drove down Sutter Road toward town and found a brand new sign bolted to a post at the bottom of my own lane, where it met the subdivision street, reading that the road beyond was private association property and through traffic was prohibited. They had claimed my road, the road my easement guaranteed me, the road I had graded and graveled and plowed at my own expense for 26 years while they did nothing, was suddenly theirs according to a sign somebody had ordered off a catalog and bolted to a post in the dark. I sat in my truck and looked at it for a long minute. Then I did what Carol taught me. I did not pull the sign down. because a man who destroys the other side's evidence has just become the other side. I got out, photographed the sign from 4 angles, measured its placement against the property pin with a tape from my toolbox, noted the date and the time in my pocket notebook, and drove down to the county recorder to pull a fresh certified copy of my 1961 easement, which I already had. But I wanted a new one with a new seal and a new date so no one could ever claim my copy was stale. Carol's voice in my head the whole drive. Get the clean copy. File it. The clerk found it in the book in about 4 minutes, stamped it, and slid it across the counter, and I drove home with it on the seat beside me like a passenger. Then came the deputy. His name was Ray Okafor, a sheriff's deputy, maybe 10 years on the job, broad through the shoulders, careful with his words. And he came up my lane one afternoon because Brenda had filed a complaint that I was operating an illegal junkyard and obstructing a community roadway. I met him at the gate with coffee and the binder already under my arm, because I knew the shape of an official visit when I saw the cruiser turn up the lane. Ray was decent, and he was honest, and he was also stuck, and he told me so straight. A filed complaint has to be acted on, he said, whether it has merit or not. That is just how it works, and he was sorry to be up here on a fool's errand, but up here he was. He walked my property at my invitation. He looked at my single immaculate Chevelle under its cover, lifted the corner of the cover to see the paint, and let out a low whistle. He looked at my shop with its swept floor and its labeled drawers and the tools hung on shadow boards. And he almost laughed, because it was the cleanest junkyard he had ever been sent to investigate. Even so, he could not make the complaint disappear, and he was honest enough not to pretend he could. What he told me instead, leaning on the gate with his coffee, was the most useful thing anyone said to me in 3 years. Build the pattern, he said. Document every single contact, every letter, every visit, every truck. Get it notarized where you can. Keep your copies somewhere safe. When they cross the line from paperwork into something actually illegal, and people like this always do, they cannot help it. You want a stack so clean and so complete that any judge can read it in 5 minutes and know exactly who did what to whom. He told me he had watched this association run 3 other people off their own property with exactly this playbook, fines and signs and lawsuits, and that the reason they always won was that the other folks lost their tempers, or lost their paperwork, or both. Do not be those folks, he said. Be the boring one with the binder. Then he gave me his card and told me to call him directly the next time anything happened, day or night. I filed the card in the front pocket of the binder. I filed his advice somewhere deeper. So I built the pattern. Through that whole 2nd year, I logged everything with the discipline of a man who had run evidence chains for a living. Every letter, 16 of them by the end. Every fine totaling $11,400 on paper, not 1 cent of which I paid or owed. Every inspector at my gate, every sign, every voicemail from Brenda's HOA attorney threatening a lien on a property they had no standing to lien. Each one saved and transcribed and dated. I bought 2 more security cameras and set them to save to 2 drives, one locked in the shop and one in a fireproof box in the house. The way I had run chain of custody for the county for 31 years, because footage on 1 drive is a story and footage on 2 drives is a fact. Megan thought I was obsessing and told me so more than once. Tess thought it was the most interesting thing happening in her 10th grade life and started keeping her own little log on her phone to match mine. And the whole time, in the back of the binder, in its own plastic sleeve, sat the photocopy of the one document none of them had ever asked to see. The easement, signed in 1961 by the man who once owned every acre on this mountain, granting the owner of my parcel in perpetuity sole and exclusive right-of-way and maintenance authority over Sutter Road. In perpetuity, To me, and to whoever held my deed after me, forever. The lawsuit came in the 3rd year. Crestline Pines, through Doug's tame attorney, sued me to quiet title on Sutter Road, claiming the association had maintained and controlled it for decades and had earned a prescriptive right to it. It was a lie so bold it almost impressed me. They had never spent $1 on that road. I had the receipts, literally, every load of gravel and every plow contract and every culvert I had ever paid for in over 26 years, sorted by year in the binder. A lawsuit is still a lawsuit, though. And the process server who came up my lane to hand me the papers looked almost embarrassed doing it. And it scared Megan badly. And it meant lawyers. And lawyers meant money I did not want to spend on a fight I knew on paper I had already won. I hired one anyway, a calm woman named Priya Nair, who came highly recommended and who read my entire binder cover to cover in one sitting at my kitchen table while I made a second pot of coffee. When she finished, she squared the pages, took off her glasses, and looked at me for a long moment. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "do you understand what you have here?" I told her I thought I did. She said, "No, you do not. This is the cleanest defense file I have seen in 15 years of doing this. And these people have no idea what is about to happen to them because they have built their whole case on the assumption that you never read your own deed." She started laughing, almost. And then she stopped because she said it was not funny, it was just rare. While that suit crawled along, Doug Hollis broke ground on the summit, the gated luxury phase he had been quietly assembling land for all along. And he had a problem he had apparently decided to solve by simply ignoring it. His only gradable construction access to the upper bench of land was Sutter Road. My road. So Brenda, sure the lawsuit would scare me into folding, sure the sign she had bolted up made the road hers, started routing Doug's gravel trucks and excavators up my lane to the staging yard he had bulldozed just past my back fence on a parcel he had bought for the project. Day after day they came. 8 trucks, then 10, then 12 on the heavy days, grinding up the road I maintained, throwing rooster tails of dust into my pines, idling diesel outside Tess's window at 6 in the morning so the whole house smelled of it before school. I stood at my gate every morning with my coffee and counted them. I photographed every license plate, front and rear. I logged every trip with a time, and I matched the plates against the public registration records for Hollis Land Partners, which is when I first started to understand that this had never been about my fence or my car at all. This was about a road, and the road was the only thing standing between Doug Hollis and a fortune. And I said nothing, and I did nothing, because Ray Okafor's words were sitting in my ears like a hand on my shoulder. Build the pattern. Let them cross the line. Be the boring one with the binder. They crossed it on a Thursday in June, at 7 in the morning, when Brenda Hollis pulled up behind a hired flatbed, marched up my own driveway, stood inside the open door of my own garage, and ordered the operator to winch my wife's Chevelle onto his truck. I came out in my work clothes with coffee in my hand, and Tess behind me on the porch already filming on her phone, the way she had learned to. I asked Brenda what she thought she was doing. She turned, and there it is. The 3rd time you have heard her say a version of it. She said, "This vehicle is in violation of community standards, and as president I have full authority to order its removal from association jurisdiction." I told the flatbed operator, level and quiet, that he was about to commit theft of a vehicle from private property and that I had it all on camera. He hesitated. Brenda screeched at him to do his job. He did his job. He hauled my wife's car down my own lane while I stood there and let him, because I had finally gotten what 3 years of patience had been waiting for. They had reached onto private property and taken a titled vehicle that harmed no one and violated no actual law, on the order of a woman with no jurisdiction. And they had done it on video, in daylight, with the plate of the flatbed and the impound yard clearly visible. I did not chase the truck. I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table where I had read the first letter 3 years before, and I made a phone call. Not to a lawyer, to the county clerk's office, to confirm one fact I already knew, and then to an old friend named Hank, who still ran a recovery yard 2 valleys over, and still owed me for a job I pulled him out of in 2009. Then I opened my laptop and looked up the public record of Hollis Land Partners, and I found exactly what I expected. Doug Hollis owned, personally and through the company, a fleet of construction trucks, 6 of them registered to a yard with a posted address. And that yard, that staging yard, full of his equipment, sat on the parcel just past my back fence. The parcel his own trucks reached only by driving up Sutter Road. My road, across my easement, without my permission, which, under the very towing statutes I had enforced for 31 years, made every one of those trucks a vehicle trespassing on private property over which I held sole and exclusive authority. Here is the part I want to say carefully, because it is the hinge of the whole thing. And it is the opposite of revenge, even though it looks like revenge. I did not go take Doug's trucks because I was angry. I went and had them lawfully removed because they were parked daily in trespass across an easement that the county record said was mine and mine alone, and because I held the active commercial license and the legal standing to do exactly that. The same statute Brenda had pretended to use against my car, the real version of it, the one that actually exists, was about to be used correctly for the first time in this whole story. I called Hank. I told him to bring his biggest flatbed and a wheel lift rig up Sutter Road the next morning at 6, and to bring his paperwork, because we were going to do this exactly by the book, or not at all. I called Deputy Okafor and told him what I intended, read him the easement language over the phone, and asked him to be present so there could be no question of a breach of the peace. He went quiet for a second, and then he said, "You have got to be kidding me." And then he said he would be there, off to the side, neutral, just to keep everyone honest. I spent that evening at the kitchen table with Tess and Megan, drafting and printing the trespass notices, one for each truck, photographing each one taped to each windshield at dusk so the timestamp was clean. Tess asked me if we were going to get Grandma's car back. I told her we were going to get a lot more than that back. Then I told her to go to bed, because school was in the morning and because whatever happened at 6, she was not going to be anywhere near it. She was safe. She stayed safe. That was the only rule I would not bend. At 6 the next morning, Hank's rigs came up my lane in the gray light, a big flatbed and a wheel lift wrecker, and we went to work. We did it slow. We did it legal. We did it the way I had done 10,000 recoveries before this one. With a discipline that does not change just because the vehicle is bigger or the day is colder. Every truck got photographed in place first, in the staging yard, plate visible, position noted, trespass notice already taped to the glass from the night before with a clean time stamp. Hank hooked each one under my written authority as the recorded easement holder, and on each one he logged a proper tow manifest, date, time, location, the statutory citation for recovery of a vehicle in trespass, and the destination yard. No shortcuts, no tempers. Just the boring, careful, unbeatable paperwork. One by one, the trucks came off that yard and went down my lane on Hank's flatbed and out to his licensed yard 2 valleys over, where they would be held, lawfully, subject to release upon payment of trespass and recovery and storage fees, exactly the way an impound is supposed to work. 6 trucks. Doug Hollis's entire working fleet, gone from the staging yard by 8 in the morning, every single one of them removed under the exact statute Brenda had pretended to invoke against a 50-year-old Chevelle. Except this time, the statute was being used the way it was actually written. Ray Okafor stood by his cruiser the whole time with his arms crossed, off to the side, neutral. Just there to keep the peace and watch that everyone stayed honest. When Hank pulled out with the last truck, Ray walked over, looked down the empty yard, and shook his head slow. "In 3 years," he said, "I have never once seen anybody beat these people at their own game. And you did it without raising your voice or breaking a single law." He almost smiled. Then he got serious again and told me to expect company before noon. Brenda found out at 9. Doug found out at 9:15, when his site foreman called him to say the entire fleet was gone, and the staging yard was empty, and there was a notice taped to the gate. By 9:30, Brenda's SUV was sliding to a stop at the bottom of my lane, and she came up Sutter Road on foot in her pink blazer and her wrong shoes, screaming before she even reached the gate. I was waiting at the gate with the binder. Tess was at school. Megan was at work. It was just me, the deputy who had come back at my request, and Brenda Hollis losing her mind on the gravel road that 3 certified documents said belonged to me. She told me I had no right. She told me I had stolen her husband's property and that she would have me arrested and ruined. She demanded the trucks back and the fines paid and the road surrendered, all in one breath, all at top volume. I let her finish. Then I opened the binder to the front, where the certified easement sat in its plastic sleeve with the recorder's fresh seal on it, and I did not hand it to her. I handed it to Deputy Okafor, because the lesson my wife taught me is that you never argue with a person like Brenda. You let the document speak, and you let a neutral authority read it out loud. So the truth is not your word against hers. It is just the truth, standing in the road. Ray read it. I watched his eyes go down the page to the line that mattered, the line about sole and exclusive right-of-way and maintenance authority, in perpetuity, recorded in 1961. Decades before Crestline Pines existed, decades before Brenda Hollis was old enough to vote. He read it twice. Then he looked up at Brenda, and his whole posture had changed. The way I had watched 100 situations change the moment the paper came out. And he said, "Mom, this road is his. It has been his since before this subdivision was drawn. Anything parked on it without his permission is trespassing, and he is a licensed recovery operator, which means what he did this morning was lawful, and what you did yesterday to his vehicle was not." The silence after that lasted a long time. A jay called somewhere in the pines. Brenda's mouth opened and closed. And then the numbers landed. The 2 numbers I want you to hold side by side, because they are the whole story. In 3 years, the amount I had paid Crestline Pines in fines, despite $11,400 billed, was 0. Not $1, because I never owed one. And the amount it cost Doug Hollis to get his 6 trucks back from Hank's lawful yard, in trespass and recovery and storage fees, plus the cost of the idled crew and the blown financing deadline on the summit, came to just over $200,000 before it was done. 0 against 200,000, the clean record against the overreach. That is what documentation buys you. It did not stop there, and it did not stop because of anything more I did. It stopped because of what they had done to themselves, on paper, in public, with witnesses. The video of Brenda ordering my wife's car hauled off private property went to my attorney Priya, and Priya took it, along with the whole binder, to the county. The quiet title lawsuit they had filed against me collapsed in a single hearing when the judge saw the recorded easement and the 26 years of gravel receipts laid out in order. And he did not just dismiss it. He ruled from the bench that the association had knowingly filed a fraudulent claim against a clearly recorded property right. And he said, looking down at Doug's attorney, that he had rarely seen a clearer case of an organization weaponizing process against a single homeowner. That ruling became the loose thread that unraveled everything else. The county opened a look at Hollis Land Partners and at the association's books and at the unlicensed code enforcement badge they had been waving at people for years, and at the towing of my car, which turned out to be exactly the felony I had known. It was the moment the flatbed pulled away. Doug lost the summit because a development with no legal access to its own upper acreage and a fraud finding on the public record cannot get a bank to fund it. And the whole project went dark with the staging yard half-graded and the dust settling for good. Brenda lost the presidency at the next association meeting, voted out by a show of hands of the very neighbors she had told for years that some people simply refused to be neighbors. I heard later that not one person stood up to defend her. The HOA's attorney, a younger man named Curtis, who had clearly never wanted any part of any of it, was the one who quietly handed Priya a folder of internal emails. The ones that showed Brenda and Doug had always known, from the very beginning, that my road and my parcel were mine, recorded and clean, and had decided to take them anyway, because they had bet I would fold before it ever reached a courtroom. He came up my lane himself to do it, stood at my gate with the folder held out in both hands, and said he was sorry, that he had a daughter and he could not look at her at night knowing what he had helped do to a man over a car. He could not stomach it any longer. I took the folder. I did not say much. There was not much to say. I never gloated at any of them, not at Curtis, not at Brenda, not at Doug. Because the record was already doing every bit of the talking, the way Carol always promised me it would, and a man who adds his own voice on top of a record like that only muddies it. They brought the Chevelle back on a Saturday. The impound yard released it the moment my attorney showed them the felony exposure, no charge. And Hank himself drove it up my lane on his flatbed and set it down gentle as an egg on the concrete pad in my garage, right where it had sat for 26 years. Tess was home for that one. She walked all the way around the car twice, checking it for scratches like a claims adjuster, and there were none. Then she put her hand flat on the hood, the way you would on a horse's neck, and she looked at me, and she said, "Grandma would have liked how you did this, Grandpa. You did not even yell." I had to turn around and find something to do in the shop for a minute after that. That evening, Megan made dinner, and we ate on the porch and watched the light go gold over the pines. And Sutter Road sat quiet below us. No diesel, no dust, no trucks, just the road my wife and I had driven up for the first time in 1999, when the flat land below was still empty and the whole mountain felt like a promise. The gate was mine, the road was mine, the car was home. And the binder, that thick 3-ring binder with a kid's drawing of a Chevelle on the spine, went back on the shelf in the shop where I could reach it, because a thing like that is never really finished. You just hope you never need the next page. So here is the lesson. The real one. The one I would want my own neighbor to hear. Authority on a clipboard is not authority. A title in a homeowners association is not a badge. And a badge bought off the internet is not a badge either. The only thing that holds up, the only thing that has ever held up, is the recorded document and the patient record of what actually happened. So pull your deed. Read it, the whole thing, every page, and walk your property line with it in your hand until you know exactly where your ground begins and ends. Find your easements and get certified copies with a fresh seal, and keep them somewhere a fire cannot reach. When someone in a pink blazer or a polo shirt tells you that your land is functionally part of their jurisdiction, do not argue and do not pay. Just write down the date and the time and every word they said and start a folder. Take the photographs. Keep the receipts. Save it to 2 drives. Be calm, be polite, be relentless, and let the paper do the shouting when the day comes. Because it will come, and on that day, the person who kept the records wins. Every single time. If you have got a story like this, an HOA that reached for something that was never theirs, put it in the comments. Because I read them, and so do a lot of folks who are fighting the same fight right now and need to know they are not crazy. Subscribe if you want to stay for the rest of these, because there are more, a lot more. Next time, I will tell you about the woman 3 counties over whose HOA fined her for the wildflowers in her own front yard, right up until the day the state told them those flowers were a protected habitat, and the association was the one breaking the law. Until then, keep your copies clean and your gate locked. This is Walt Brennan. Thanks for riding up the road with me.